Hey, Grandma, what's going on?
Not much. What's going on with you?
Nothing. Do you mind if I take a little bit of your time and do a social studies project with you?
In whose project?
A social studies project.
Yeah, this Sammy.
Yeah,
Yes, I don't mind at all. I was waiting for you to call me.
yeah. All right, so I'm just gonna let you know you're being recorded. Is that okay?
Okay, that's fine.
All right. So I'm gonna ask you a couple questions. Is that okay?
That's absolutely fine, Sam.
All right. So what is your name?
Barbara Feinberg Cantor
Okay. Where were you born?
in Ocala, Florida.
Okay. What is your hometown?
Well, where I live now, Oak Ridge, Tennessee. Not where I was born, but where I've lived many years
All right. Where were you born?
in Ocala, Florida.
All right. What was the name of your parents?
Max and Minnie Feinberg.
All right. Where did you go to school?
I went to elementary school in Ocala, Florida, and also in Tampa, Florida. But I went to high school in Atlantic City, New Jersey.
Okay. What did you do for a living?
I was a mother first, and then later did teaching.
Okay. Did you have children? If so, how many?
I had have three children.
Okay. What was your childhood like?
My early childhood was everybody knew everybody in a small Florida town. Ocala, Florida, where I was born, was such a safe place. People didn't even have to lock their houses.
All
It
right.
was delightful. Looking back, I doubt that there's very much like that nowadays.
Okay. How has life changed since you were 14 to 15 years old?
Oh, life changed. I joined several clubs. I became aware that there were very good-looking young boys. I think I was a normal 14 or 15-year-old.
Okay. What do you remember the most about the 20th century?
I look back on it now in view of all the things going on in our country and the world and think how lucky we were that we never really questioned our own country being in such big danger. It was safe.
All right. So tell me about this, safe thing, whatever, this safe country that you thought you were in, that you were in.
Well, there was very little crime. There was occasional crime. People were friendly. It wasn't utopia. I don't mean to say that it was an imaginary, fantastic, wonderful, although it appears like that from my perspective now. But it was, in a small town, people know each other and they're kind. They take the time to talk to kids. And it was a whole different world. But as the 20th century ended and we got into the 21st century, even though we had had wars in the meantime, it still wasn't as upsetting a situation as we have nowadays.
Okay. What was the biggest, as in, like, incident that happened? As in, like, if you can think of a specific, like, crime or incident, what do you think, what was the biggest one that, like, impacted your life the most?
I guess the death of my father when I was 13 years old.
Okay. Um, so the occasional crime you were talking about, is there, like, any more detail you want to, like, fill
No,
me in
I
on?
didn't fortunately know any of the criminals, but people didn't have to lock their houses. Nobody stole from, and I don't mean there was no crime, but it was very unusual. And that's when I was, even prior to my teens, I went to high school in what I considered a big city. My high school years were spent in Atlantic City, New Jersey.
Okay. I'm forgetting now. Like, what year were you born again?
1930.
Okay. Do you remember the JFK assassination?
Yes, as it turns out, my husband, your grandfather, was an exchange scientist to England. We lived a year in England in a small village, and he worked for the atomic energy group. He was an exchange scientist. We were living in England when over the, as they called it, the telly, while we were in England in an evening over the television, we heard that President Kennedy had been assassinated.
So, how long is this, thing, how long was it going on? Like, do you remember the first broadcast, like, the big breaking news?
No, I don't remember the exact time, but I think the British got word of the assassination fairly quickly because it was supper time in England, and there happened to be a playhouse group that met to do local plays, and everybody but me was British. And because my accent would not have fit in, my American accent, in with the British actors, I volunteered to do the placement of props and so on, and to help backstage. I was not in the play. And one of the people who was in this group had just arrived at the place where the playhouse, where the players were rehearsing, and he said to me, "Bobby, I hear your president was just killed." And I ran from this location where the players were rehearsing back to the house where we were renting. And your grandfather and I sat glued to the television. It was a nightmare. We could not believe this.
Yeah, it was pretty sad. So do you remember, what do you remember most about Vietnam or the Great Society or something like that? What do you remember most about those things?
Well, in retrospect, apparently it was horrendous, and the veterans, or so I've heard, were not. It was as if that war didn't really arouse all the people. There are things that you just can't explain. When those vets came home, apparently, now this was hearsay, they did not get the acclaim and the praise and the thanks for all the sacrifices they had made. And I understand if the news on television is correct and the newspapers are correct, there's been more attention to the sacrifices that the young men and women gave in those times. The wars were pretty gruesome.
Yeah. So you were what, 10 or 11 when World War II started in America?
I was living in Tampa, Florida. I was 11 years old when Pearl Harbor was bombed.
Was that like a big moment in your life as a child?
Oh, sure. It's the first time I even knew what war meant. And Franklin Roosevelt was president of the United States, but there was something about that man, whether you were a Democrat or a Republican, that made you feel, in spite of all the horrendous stories that came out of World War II, made you feel that things would work out.
Yeah.
It's the first war that I was alive in. there were other wars, as you know.
All right, so very last question. Um, what was your favorite president during the 20th century?
I have to say Franklin Roosevelt.
Okay, good to know.
Yeah, something like a grandfather. I mean, there was, there's no explanation. It's just a feeling. But I have to say, and I'm sure he was far from an angel. And nobody is perfect. But I have to say, I thought that I somehow must have thought that he was related to me because I looked upon him as a grandfather.
Okay, well that's just about it. Thank you, Grandma.